Okay, so let's see who else is coming in. I see Nancy Annette, good morning, and Stephanie Elizabeth, and I see Flor Hidalma. Francisco Video is joining, and more people are coming in. So as usual, we're going to record the class in case someone is not able to attend or they have some issues with connections. They can always come back and watch the recording. So we're starting our second week of classes, and let's review on what we studied the first week. The first week, I presented you with some materials in the Aula Virtual, where you have all the resources that we're going to be using this first period. So this first period, the documents that I share with you are the textbook that we're going to be using as reference. Hopefully you guys have the chance to revise the book and practice. Your first assignment from the book was to study and complete chapter number 6, the passive voice. So that is our first topic for the class. And the second document that I shared was the PPT that contained the information from the first class. All right. The second handout and the other information that I provided you with is the handout for TOEFL. Remember that we talked about grammar for TOEFL. So this other handout is also available in the Aula Virtual. I hope that you had the chance to also revise it. And we're going to be using this handout as reference also. Okay, so that's what we have done so far. So we were revising the documents. So let's start with our first topic for today. The homework was to study chapter number 6 about passive. Let's review. So hopefully you completed the exercises, and now we're going to start our first part of the class by reviewing the structures of passive voice. First, let's start with a little review. Take a look at the PPT. Here we have a little chart, and this chart was provided to you. Here is the summary on how the passive voice is formed. So we have different tenses that we can use when we write passive voice. So there are two terms that we use when we talk about passive voice. We usually start the sentences in an active voice. Active voice means, for example, in the simple present, I read an interesting novel. Passive voice, an interesting novel is read. So let's take a look at the first sentence. What is the focus, or why do we use passive voice in English? Let's think about that question first. How and when do we use passive voice in English? That's the first question for this morning. How and when do we use passive voice in English? Looking at the first example on the slide. By the way, can you see my presentation?
Sí, sí, se puede ver.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. So, the first question is, how and when do we use passive voice in English? If I have the sentence, simple present, I read an interesting novel, the focus on the active voice is the subject, the doer of the action. I read the interesting novel. But if I'm not interested in specifying who read it, I will use passive voice. In passive voice, the focus is the action rather than the doer. Who does the action? So that's passive voice in English. And we say, an interesting novel is read by who? By me. But in this case, the information by me is not relevant. So if the object of the sentence is not relevant, we use passive voice instead of active voice. What is the second tense that we use for passive voice? We can use passive voice in present continuous form. Let's take a look at the example. I am reading an interesting novel. An interesting novel is being read. Past simple. I read an interesting novel last night. An interesting novel was read last night. Past continuous. I was reading an interesting novel. An interesting novel was being read. So, whatever the tense that we use, we decide if we want to focus on the doer or on the action. In this case, in passive voice, we're focusing on the action. So we're using passive structure. So this chart is also available for you as reference. So what are the tenses? Present simple, present continuous, past simple, past continuous, present perfect, future simple, future with going to, and we can also use modal auxiliary verbs. Second. Okay, so this is our first review. Remember the structure. So every time that you have doubts on how we write the sentence in passive voice in the present perfect, for example, let's refer to this chart over here that is going to help us understand better the structure. If the sentence is in the past simple, for example, always refer to this chart so it can help you to understand better the structure. All right, that's the first one. Hold on a second. A little problem with this thing here. Okay, so that's our first review, the little chart on the structure of passive voice. So let's take a look at the book. Your first assignment was to study chapter number 6. Let's review the explanations on the most important aspects when forming passive voice. So let's start with the first one, the agent and the instrument. We said that the person who performs an action in a passive sentence is called the agent. The agent is the doer of the action. It's usually preposition by. Okay, so we're just reviewing the most important aspects here on the explanations. So the agent may or may not be mentioned. If it is not mentioned, it's because it's not relevant. Or if it is mentioned, it's because it's important for the meaning of the sentence. Like the example that we did last class, my purse was found by one of the cleaners. So if I want to focus on who did the action, I will include the information after the preposition by one of the cleaners. But if that information is not relevant for me, I will only say my purse was found. I don't need the information that says by one of the cleaners because the information is understood or is not relevant. Okay, example, a new road has been built. In this case, a new road has been built. We don't have the information by whom, by some workers, but this information is not too relevant, so we don't include it. Next example, an object which causes something to happen is called the instrument and is usually introduced by with, the preposition with. So we say he was hit on the head with a hammer. So if we want to mention the instrument with what the object was done, then we mention it with a preposition with. So two uses, by and with. Those are the two prepositions that we're going to use if we want to include and refer to the instrument or if we want to refer to the agent. All right, so we're reviewing the first use of passive voice. We also have some verbs that contain two objects. Okay, example, a note was handed to me. Two objects, a note and to me. A note was handed to me. So we have two objects. What is the first object? A note. Second object, to me. To me is usually the receiver of the action. What were you handed? A note. All right. So also we have many other verbs of this type. So it depends on the sentence and the verbs that we are going to use. That's how we structure the sentence. Some common verbs are bring, give, lend, pass, pay, promise, sell, send, show, tell, and so many others. These are the most common ones. So we have also